So, here we're going to go over some quick philosophical principles to get you acquainted with how we are going to be looking at theories and problems for the rest of the course. So, the first big idea that I want to go over is the idea of epistemic reflection. So, what is meant by epistemic? If epistemology is the study of knowledge, so epistemic is just an adjective which means regarding knowledge. So when I talk about epistemic reflection, all I'm doing really is talking about reflecting upon the knowledge that one has, or the knowledge that one thinks that one has. So how do we engage in epistemic reflection? So I have a very brief summary here. The first thing we do is we brainstorm theories. So in the first half of this course, we're going to be looking at a lot of moral theories. All of those moral theories were brainstormed by somebody, but you could also brainstorm your own philosophical theories and consider those in the running for being possible candidates for a good moral theory. But what do we do after we brainstorm theories? The second thing we do is we brainstorm counterexamples. So now that we have all of these theories, we want to try to break them. So how do we break a theory? We think of a counterexample to that theory. The theory is meant to apply in all cases. And a counterexample would be an instance in which the theory doesn't apply, and that would mean that the theory can't, in fact, apply in all cases. And after that, we're going to repeat ad infinitum, so to infinity. We're going to repeat and repeat and repeat, and really never stop repeating, because we're always trying to perfect our knowledge. So that's the main idea, is we don't want to accept things at face value, and we don't want to just accept what's given to us. We want to brainstorm theories for ourselves. Then we want to brainstorm criticisms to those theories. And in that way, we can try to perfect the theories that we have. So how do we think of these counterexamples that I'm talking about? Well, here I'm going to show a couple epistemic test questions. So these are questions that will test whether or not our theories are good candidates for being true. So what might be some good questions to ask about our theories? The first question is, are they self-consistent? In other words, does the theory logically contradict itself? So if you find your theory is contradicting itself for one reason or another, that's a pretty surefire way to know that there's something wrong with your theory. Theories should be self-consistent. Another question you might ask is it intuitive? In other words, does the theory violate common sense? One good test for moral theories, perhaps especially, is to see whether or not people will be able to intellectually get on board with those theories. When people hear your theory, do they think you're crazy? Or when people hear your theory, do they think that you're onto something? In other words, does the theory align with the intuitions that those people already have? Because ultimately, at least in morality, where we can't look at the physical world and make experiments to test our theories, we have to test our theories against something like the intuitions that people already have about morality. And ultimately, a theory is only as good as it is convincing. If you can't convince anyone of your theory, then it's going to die in obscurity. So one test of a theory would be to see whether or not that theory can get off the ground and into people's brains, whether or not it's going to clash with what they already believe, or whether it can settle nicely in to their worldview. Another question we might ask, are the theories explanatory? In other words, does the theory fail to explain the phenomena or not? So, in philosophy, we hope to find ways of explaining why the world is the way that it is. And when we propose theories, we hope that those theories will offer explanations and not just assert that the world is this way. Why is the world this way? It's this way because it's this way. That's a very dissatisfying answer. And it's dissatisfying precisely because it's not explanatory. We are hoping to find some underlying reason why things are the way they are. So any theory that fails to give reasons, or any theory that there are no reasons for, those are the kinds of theories that are going to be dissatisfying. The satisfying theories will give reasons for things in the world, and there will be reasons in the world for thinking that the theory is true. Another question we might ask, is the theory comprehensive? In other words, does the theory leave important factors out? So you might have one theory that covers certain situations, and you might have another theory that covers other situations. And those theories might be as good as they can be for those situations, respectively. But then if you want to find a theory, if you ever want to find a theory that explains those theories, you're going to want a theory that explains not just one situation or another, but situations generally. So as you expand the scope of your study, you're going to want to try to make your theory more and more comprehensive, cover more and more cases. And ultimately, if it doesn't cover certain cases, you're going to want to ask, well, why doesn't it cover those cases? What's so special about those cases that makes this theory not apply? And is there some kind of super theory, some kind of better theory that can accommodate for those other cases? And lastly, we can ask, is the theory simple? In other words, does the theory have unnecessary extra claims? So, the fewer claims we make, the fewer claims we have to defend. The more claims we make, the more claims we have to defend. If we make only a few claims, there's going to be a small chance that we're wrong. And if we make a lot of claims, there's going to be a large chance that we're wrong. We can see that that's true just by the fact that each claim has a certain probability of being wrong. So as you start adding up the claims, you start multiplying those probabilities. Eventually, you're going to get huge theories that are highly, highly improbable. So the smaller theories are better. If you can say something in less words and explain the whole thing with that one simple principle, then you should probably opt for that over the alternative where you have to make a bunch of unnecessary claims. And especially if those claims are unnecessary, then they don't need, the theory does not need them anyway, and you can just move on without them. So next, let's look at some possible prima facie ethical properties. So by prima facie, all we mean is at first glance. So these are properties that we think that make something ethical, at least at first glance. So what kind of properties might be in the category of the ethical? So let's go over the list we have here. This is a short attempt to be to cover as much ground as we can in the ethical domain. But the list is probably not comprehensive, so there may be more things to add to this list that we could think of. So the first thing is you want ethics to be practicable. In other words, ethics relates to action, and you actually want to be able to practice your ethics. You want to practice what you preach. You don't want just a theory that you never act upon. That would sort of be this inert theory, and it's not really an ethical consideration, seemingly, until it is sort of demanding or permitting the actions that we take. Next, we think of ethics as deliberative. What do we mean by that? Ethics is a matter that requires one to choose between options. You have to deliberate. You have to figure out, of the possibilities available to you, which ones of those are better and worse. So we want ethics to give us answers to questions like that. We want ethics to distinguish between good options and bad options. Next, we want ethics to be conciliatory. Ideally, if I'm talking to you about what to do, and we have different opinions about what to do, then we can discuss ethics and we can come to some kinds of agreements about what to do based on ethical principles. We also want ethics to be universal. We want our ethical theory to comprehensively explain what to do in all situations, no matter who we find ourselves to be, no matter where or when we find ourselves to be. This is largely because we want to be able to say our theory is covering everything. That's the epistemic idea of comprehensiveness. We also want ethics to be humanistic. When we think about ethics, we think about largely what is it that humans like ourselves do? What is it that humans should do? And whatever the answer is to those questions, it seems like what it means to be human and what humans want and need is going to factor largely into our considerations of how we should act. Next, we want ethics to be impartial, but permissively personal. So impartial just means that we want it to be the case that ethics doesn't make arbitrary distinctions between people. If two people are equal in all relevant respects, then ethics should treat them equally. If people are different in some relevant respects, then ethics might treat them differently in those respects, but it should still treat them equally in the respects that they are equal. This means that we can't arbitrarily discriminate and still follow ethics. But at the same time, we don't want ethics to be so impartial that we can't make personal distinctions at all. Sometimes we think that it's our ethical obligation to take care of things that are personal to us, and that we're allowed to have that preference for things that are personal to us. An ethics that would be most satisfying would in some way reconcile our impartial obligations with our more personal obligations. We also think that ethics should be obligatory, but motivational. So what do we mean by obligatory? We mean that there should be things that ethics demands that we do. Ethics is not simply saying this is the best outcome, but it doesn't matter if you do it. Ethics is saying this is the best outcome, and you should do it because it's the best outcome. Something like that. At the same time, we want there to be a motivation to do the ethical thing. It would be no good if ethics gives us obligations, but we just shirk all of those obligations. We want ethics to be able to motivate us to follow our obligations in some way. For whatever reason that may be, we want to feel like we should, in fact, do what we are obligated to do. And lastly, though we could add more to this list, lastly here we have rule following, but with exceptions, as something that we see ethics as providing. Oftentimes we see ethics as a system of rules, or if not a system of rules, a system maybe of guidelines for what to do. And so, like with our obligations, we want those rules to have a clear, direct set that can be followed. And we want to be able to use those rules to deliberate and then set out following our deliberation on some course of action. But at the same time, it doesn't seem like those rules should be all entirely absolute. Because life is complicated and life has exceptions, it seems like ethical rules probably will have exceptions too. In other words, the rules will apply in certain cases for certain conditions for certain reasons, but may not apply in other conditions for other reasons. And those roughly are things that we want to think about when we're considering whether or not ethical theories seem like they work as ethical theories. We want to take the ethical theory and ask ourselves, can we describe that ethical theory in all of these ways? Is it practicable? Is it deliberative? Is it impartial? Is it obligatory? Etc., etc. And if it is, then that may be a point in favor of adopting that ethical theory. If it's not, if it doesn't follow any one of these particular ethical properties, then we have to consider, well, maybe that's a point against that ethical theory. Or maybe we want to still keep the ethical theory with a modification to accommodate these properties. Or maybe we want to keep the ethical theory and abandon one of these properties. Perhaps it would turn out that one of these properties, while it seemed like a good ethical property, after some thought and reflection, actually isn't necessary for a good ethical system. So going forward in the class, we're going to first go over a bunch of moral theories and try to apply the epistemic and ethical principles that we've talked about here. And we're also going to go through and see whether or not those theories can accommodate what we've learned here. We're also going to go through some moral problems, and we're going to see how those moral problems can be thought of in terms of some of the principles that we've talked about here.